dependencies that we all have, and that is just as much a part of this climate change solution as our technological solutions are. And so that's really something that I've been feeding my soul and keeping me from getting depressed a little bit more. So just at the approval of the agenda, as people were able to review it, if there's any additional items that people would like to add to the agenda. No? Okay. So do we need to do a vote to approve the agenda? Is that the process? So can I get someone? Thank you very much. And a second. Do we need a second? Thank you. And any objections to the agenda? No? Everything's okay online, I think so as well? Okay, excellent. So we'll accept the agenda. If there's any additional items that anybody has, please do raise them. We can it's not too late. We can kind of bring that into the mix as well. Any declarations of interest that people want to note for any of the agenda items or anything? No? Okay, so that's taken care of. Approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. So based on the conversations that we've been having back and forth, there's going to be two different types of minutes that come from these meetings. There's the official meeting notes, which are following the requirements from the City of Hamilton's committees and everything like that, that follows the process that we're required to follow. And that will be the official meeting notes that we approve. However, just before we go into that reviewing of the minutes, there's also going to be more detailed meeting notes coming out of the meetings, because one of the key things that we did highlight that we want to be able to kind of create a more detailed list so that people who didn't make it to meetings can read the more detailed meeting notes, and in that way kind of catch up a little bit more on the content of what was discussed at each of the meetings. They won't be part of the official meetings, but they will be available on the on the hub that we'll be sharing as well. So I apologize. I want to apologize in advance for not getting out the hub link with more time so that you could review the meetings and also have a memory of what was discussed at the first meeting. But in the future, I promise that we will be more prompt in getting out the more detailed meeting notes for people to kind of identify what might be missing on that notes. So just in the official meeting notes, are there any changes or errors or omissions that people want to note on the official meeting notes? No? Then can we have someone approve the meeting and second it? Thank you. Thank you. Perfect. Sorry? A vote? Okay. And then can we also get a vote from the committee? And I think it has to be only voting members from that one? Voting members. So, and can we get a vote for approval of the minutes from all voting members, please? And online? Thank you. Okay. Any objections that we should be noting? No? All right. Excellent. So those are approved. The next item on the agenda is communications, of which I don't believe we have any. Is that correct? No? Okay. We don't have any delegation requests for this meeting. However, I think that that's one of the areas that this committee is an area where if committee members do have suggestions or if for delegations that should be coming in front of us, this is an opportunity for, this is going to be a standing item on the agenda, and as such we can have delegations coming to this committee as well. I don't believe we have any consent items. Is that correct? No? Perfect. And what's the difference between delegation? Oh, I get it. The delegation requests. Okay, so the delegation requests, when we do have them, is that a voting requirement? Do we have to vote on the delegation requests when they get discussed, and then in order to make it to the next public hearings and delegations item? Okay, thank you. All right. And
sir, just a question on that. So does that mean that someone who wants to come before us would need to submit a delegation request? Like, we don't meet that often. So what I'm seeing or what I'm thinking of is it's probably going to be a 3 month lag
Yeah.
between someone, like, is there some way to do that between meetings to vote on delegation requests? Is that possible?
I believe you can do it in the same meeting if everyone approves. So if we get a request, we can say, yes, we approve this person to come delegate, and then they can immediately delegate.
Okay, cool.
Okay, excellent. All right, that solves that problem. So I think the next item on the agenda is staff presentations. So if I can turn it over to Trevor, just for an update on the annual progress report that the Climate Change Department will be providing to council.
Yeah, thanks, Co-Chair Gabby and the Climate Change Advisory Committee. I just want to say thanks again for everyone's patience as we work out some of these technical glitches. As a new committee, we also continue to learn on this back-end support system. So kudos to Beatrice for doing a great job on that. Yeah, so we should be all live on the city's YouTube channel, and everyone online can hear us as long as if we don't get any comments back that they can't, which is fine. So yeah, I'm just going to quickly go through, and Beatrice, if you don't mind, just going through the next slide. Again, just as a reminder, Hamilton's Climate Action Strategy is comprised of 2 key plans, and within each plan have a variety of up to 30 actions. And within those actions, within the Community Energy and Emissions Plan and the Climate Change Impact Adaptation Plan, there are tables at the end of those documents that go over potential indicators. And this is where we would love to get your feedback on as we embark on the next round. And this is a very iterative process, and you'll see some of the indicators where it's this action is going to lead to more strategies and information, which then may possibly result in more indicators, for example. So definitely an iterative process, and I just want everyone to kind of keep that in mind as we go through it. Next slide, please. Okay, so each indicator, as we do with all of the actions, are broken up by major low carbon transformations according to the Community Energy and Emissions Plan. And next slide. And then also broken up between the Climate Change Impact Adaptation Plan and the major resilient themes. Next slide. So if it's okay, I think it's best if Linda and I do the whole presentation first, and then we're more than happy to go back to the slides if anyone has any questions. And I'm not going to, because it will take probably the whole meeting to go through every single indicator and discuss it, but they are on your screen, and apologies if it's a little small, but I'll just do a brief summary of the main indicators per low carbon transformation and per resilient theme area. And so the first indicators are all about those enabling actions. And so just as a refresher, those actions are around development of a carbon budget and accounting framework, looking at expanding our energy reserve for renewable energy projects, as well as looking at creating a green bond assessment. And so, for example, some of these indicators, as you could probably imagine, is we want to be able to robustly track the total dollars spent on those renewable energy projects from a corporate level. But knowing that as we develop a green bond assessment and the framework for that, similar to a carbon budget and accounting framework, there will be more detailed metrics. And that's really what the carbon budget is all about, is being able to detail and quantify greenhouse gas emissions reductions and or potential increases in our actions that we do as a corporation, as well as policies and other decision making. Next slide. Okay, so transformation number 1, innovating our industry. Of course, and this is what we do already, we track annual industrial greenhouse gas emissions from a variety of databases, including the National Pollutant Release Inventory of large emitters. But what we don't necessarily do is break them out by companies. And so we really want to start drilling down into those company by company that's publicly available, and then look at the different sector emissions related to industry. We also, and Linda may speak to more to this if there's any questions about this, but really looking to get a student to look at doing an analysis on industrial companies across Hamilton and looking at how many of them have a net zero strategy. We're actually just at that's why I'm wearing this stupid ties. We're at the Bay Area Economic Summit, and we're really interested in working with our economic development to get a better analysis on total number of clean tech companies across Hamilton, and really interested to work with our economic development colleagues on that. But there's also some training and retraining programs that we need our academic institutions to help us out. So we've been starting conversations with institutions like Mohawk College, McMaster University. Haven't had any conversations with Redeemer yet, but then also looking at including that EDI lens and looking at how many bursaries or subsidies are out there. And this is the type of information we're really hoping to get some advice from you folks on in terms of your awareness of other external databases, organizations, et cetera, that track and report on this type of information that we may not be aware of. Next slide, please. Next, low carbon transformation, transforming our buildings. The top one is around green development standards, and that's a good example of where, sure, there are metrics and impact categories within that, but we're hoping that as that green development standards, knock on wood, are approved and we move forward in terms of implementation, there could be further indicators. And then the rest are fairly straightforward in terms of, yes, of course, we want to track total megawatts of solar installed, both at the community and the corporate level, as well as we are tracking, and this is where we want to do a better job of citywide tracking, but of course, we're going to track the number of building retrofits through our Better Homes Hamilton program by ward to look at those priority neighborhood needs as well, but also thinking about the building retrofits, and I'd love to get the group's input on that in terms of other retrofit programs that are out there. For example, the Greener Homes, Federal Greener Homes, any Enbridge programs, Green Ventures out there, for example, and how we can better collect those citywide building retrofits. And of course, skilled workforce trends are an important one. And this is what we do previously, and what we'll continue to do is we track and report through utility consumption data, looking at building energy and greenhouse gas emission sector trends from both industry, but also from commercial and residential. And we break that out and report that to council every year. Next slide, please. All right, this is a long one, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but this is low carbon transformation number 3, changing how we move. And again, it's really about getting the infrastructure built to get people out of their cars and taking more active, sustainable forms of transportation. So we want to do a better job of tracking cycling infrastructure and breakdown of cycling infrastructure. We also want to look at the percent decarbonized of our HSR bus fleet, transit ridership, EV chargers, but also, again, that training components, as well as looking at working with our transportation planning and parking colleagues around total number of parking spaces versus EV parking versus number of bike parking. And I know I've gotten some previous great data from Gabby from the MTO in terms of total number of EV vehicles, but also we want to start looking at parking spots and EV infrastructure as well. And then the last one is around the number of campaigns that promote EV, either EV uptake or EV infrastructure or other educational campaigns. Next slide, please. And then transformation number 4, revolutionizing renewables. That top one is I continue to struggle with, and one of the actions is really about creating a state-of-the-art electricity grid, knowing that utilities have a key role to play, the ISO have a key role to play. So we're looking at certain dollars of investments by utilities and ISO and the province towards building the electrification capacity within Hamilton, looking at total megawatts of renewable energy. The ISO is coming out with quite a number of requests for proposals related to battery storage. So we'll be interested to track both I think we need to track that at a provincial level because it's provincial data, but also looking at how much of that investments are being invested into Hamilton. There is a green hydrogen feasibility study that again will have new metrics or new indicators potentially, as well as a big important part of revolutionizing renewables is capturing waste heat and working with folks like Hamilton Community Enterprises on capturing residual waste heat from industry to decarbonize our district energy. And then looking at, of course, tons of organics diverted from landfill, broken out by sector, which is, it's easier said than done, actually, breaking those out by those sectors. Next slide, please. And then last, on the low carbon transformation and the community energy and emissions plan, it's all about growing our city in the most sustainable way. So we want to be able to have our planning policy folks do a review of our official plan with that climate lens and how much of that stronger language. And I think this is where you folks can advise on like what is strong language or what needs to be updated in the official plan. So just maybe highlighting that in terms of an advisory role. We want to look at percent of new dwellings within walking distances of transit, transportation, and green space. And that sort of GIS mapping and GIS analysis is pretty straightforward, actually, and we can do that. Looking at number of secondary plans and of course percent tree canopy cover and trends across the city of Hamilton in terms of our 50,000 per year tree planting target, but also what impact that has in terms of the tree canopy target, which is now through the urban forest strategy, 40% by, I'm going to get the date wrong, is it 2050, Linda? The urban forest canopy? Yeah, 40% urban forest tree canopy cover citywide by 2050. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so now we're getting into the resilient theme areas and the climate adaptation plan. We're looking at tracking diversion of stormwater both in terms of amounts and the overall rates within a certain area. That's going to be a tricky one because we're going to have to work with the stormwater management folks on how to best track that, but also looking at number of low impact developments across the city. If you guys are aware of any both public or private low impact development examples across the city, send them our way. I'd love to hear about them. Looking at climate resiliency retrofits, we have an existing protective plumbing program, which generally wasn't considered climate action, or I shouldn't say it wasn't considered climate action, but that's been a longstanding program before Hamilton's climate action strategy, dealing with sewer surcharges, which is part of climate resiliency. We want to do a better job of tracking and reporting, because we do track, but we don't necessarily report transparently on the number of flood-related calls, while also maintaining privacy within that tracking as well, right? And then there's an important one around helping those and clearing our sidewalks and looking at the number of requests for snow angel programs, which those who are not familiar with, that's a volunteer program where you could get young people or other people to volunteer to clear either driveways or sidewalks for people that may not be able to. Next slide. Okay. I'm not going to go through all of these, but there are 2 slides actually of indicators related to people and health for good reasons, right? This is all about protecting our population, putting in actions that will not only track and conduct surveillance related to morbidity, mortality, and hospital visits related to extreme weather. And I'm proud to say that some folks that I used to work with in public health, they are doing that surveillance now. So when you look at that heat event that we just experienced last week, they have been collecting the data that will look at, has there been an uptake of hospital admissions related to that heat event, which then they'll be able to report out transparently. There are other actions related to setting up a registry, and really what we're calling that is there is an existing mobile integrated health program. Lots of actions related to overall media releases and website metrics. This is where too we really want to get some advice on number of organizations that may help or want to help in delivering emergency preparedness / cool kits, which we have started, or public health I should say have started. And also tracking cases of vector-borne diseases and growing trends, which we've seen from Public Health Ontario about the emerging risks and increase or new vector-borne diseases within our area because of climate change. Next slide. Yeah, lots of indicators just around, again, tracking the number of heat alerts, tracking the number of cooling and warming centers, but as well as looking at the time period or the time lapse of when a heat event or an extreme weather event happens, how long does it take for the city to report out about it, or better yet, is proactive about it and reports out about it before the event actually happens. So looking at that more proactive rather than reactive approach. And then working with our conservation authorities to look at better flow and level meter monitoring in creeks, but also in municipal sewers. So that's Hamilton Water as well. All right, a few more slides and then I'll almost wrap up and hand things over to Linda. Next slide, please. Resilient theme number 3, natural environment, agriculture, and water. We're looking at better tracking, and I'll say the first two is we don't necessarily have this data yet as it relates to statistics on proposed enhancement of natural areas and/or looking at percentage or total hectares or acres or whatever the land area will be that we'll be tracking, but looking at acquisition of land space converted to natural areas. And although we don't have that data, folks in our environmental services division and forestry are proposing a plan to better track that. Looking at enforcement and other indicators related to our urban forest strategy, which includes potential fines related to the illegal taking down of trees in terms of a future tree protection bylaw potentially, looking at percent equitable tree canopy cover, looking at number of community gardens and the statistics related to that. We of course track the number of community gardens that we or neighbor to neighbor or other organizations run, but we don't necessarily track is like how many, for example, are using rainwater capture, what are the users that are using these community gardens, how can we better serve those users. And then the last few are related to food diversion and the percent of food waste, as well as the amount of redirected into local programs as well. Next slide, and I think this is the final slide, and I'll hand it over to Linda after this. The last theme is resilient, theme 4, energy and the economy. This is really around helping our businesses become more resilient to the impacts potentially of supply chain disruption and developing programs around supply chain continuity, looking at engaging our businesses and the local best practices. But then there's also a strong piece here related to emergency backup power in terms of our corporate facilities. So looking at the amount of megawatts or gigajoules or whatever the energy indicator is going to be around local energy generated for backup power, or for that matter, I should say battery storage technology, for example, for backup power. Looking at number of climate resilient retrofits for a corporation, as well as number of zero or low carbon backup power within our facilities. And I'll say even just getting backup power in our facilities is a good first step, especially those that have cooling capabilities. And then looking at better tracking our less known greenhouse gas emissions related to that in terms of like backup generators, for example. So I know that was a whirlwind, and I'm happy to answer any questions or go back to slides as we go into the Q&A portion, but I'll hand it over to Linda now to go over the table of contents of our future report that we want to report on.
Thanks, Trevor. So welcome to our world. We're kind of immersed up to our eyeballs in priority indicators right now, and I think really looking for feedback from all of you, especially on the community side of things, in terms of how we can better collect that information and ultimately incorporate that data. And you know, it's a matter of seeing the climate forest for all of the trees in the annual report that we present to the General Issues Committee each year. That report, General Issues Committee, is all of council for those who weren't aware of that. And this is just a draft table of contents that we wanted to share. We as a staff team in the Climate Office are circling back to last year's annual report, which was the first one that came out of our office. And we're kind of tweaking the table of contents and looking at how we can, you know, improve this annual report as we go. So this first slide, just very high level, wanted to give you a sense of some of the key components that we're integrating into the annual report or proposing to. Of course, a land acknowledgement. This year, we're proposing to include an executive summary. We will provide an update on the Office of Climate Change Initiative's priority focus areas, and I'll get into a little bit more detail about that in a moment. Every report includes a GHG greenhouse gas inventory for Hamilton, and that includes both a corporate and a community-wide inventory. We've got a very detailed section that covers off progress with implementation of Hamilton's climate action strategy, and that's where we report on all that big long list of indicators. We'll incorporate into the report as well a climate change reserve update. And then the final portion of the report will just wrap things up and look ahead to 2025, 2026, and what needs to be happening next. So next slide, please. So this is just a little bit more on our priority focus areas. We've shared these with you already, and these were identified in 2023 when we were just starting so that we could dive in and really get to work. So we now want to circle back and provide a bit of a report on these pieces. And as well, we're acknowledging that some of these pieces are big pieces and they're continuing on. So we have lots to report on climate governance. We now have our internal Climate Change Initiative Steering Committee. Director Maharjan, who introduced himself earlier, is a member of that team of senior staff who talk internally about climate issues. We're getting close to starting an extended leadership group, again, an internal committee, and of course, all of you exist in our meeting. So I've put in brackets here, pick, question mark, because we definitely will have an update on the fact that this advisory committee now exists. And as staff, we were thinking it might be nice if there's a way we could coordinate for all of you to get into a picture that we could include in the annual report. We'll have a section on carbon budgeting. That work is unfolding moving forward. Definitely some updates on our Better Homes Hamilton pilot and the work that we're doing on our net zero energy performance standard. And on the urban greening side, for sure, and we've shared this with you, we've now got Adam Watson, who's part of our team, and Adam coordinates the Community Garden Network, so we're definitely going to make sure we share some information on that front in the report. And then as well, in our priority focus areas, an update on our communications and engagement strategy and the emerging climate justice framework that we're working on. Next slide, please. And then as well, Trevor walked you through all of the transformations and the themes. For all of these, we're proposing that for each category, we'd like to highlight both corporate and community actions that help to fulfill, all of the actions that sit under each of the transformations and themes. And so for sure, we'd love to hear from you if you think that there are certain community actions that it would be worth us highlighting in the report. We always attach an appendix to the report that's got that very detailed chart and an update. This is what we did last year and we're intending to do again this year. So the main body of this public-facing report gives us a chance to pull out a few and kind of profile them. So again, we'd like to do both corporate and community actions under each of the transformations and themes. And then of course, we also, and you'll see this in last year's report, they were almost like feature stories about actions that are happening both in the community and on the corporate side, and we definitely love your ideas around how we could do that as well. Next slide, please. Okay, and then we've already got, I've covered off that we've got these sections at the end with progress, with implementation of 2023 projects, and we'll probably include at least an update of the projects that will ultimately be funded in 2024. And then that final section of conclusions and looking ahead to 2025, 2026. And next slide. Okay, so just want to also walk through so that you all understand, if you want to get a sense of how we structure all of this. First, you could go back and look at last year's GIC meeting. We presented on October the 18th last year, but mark your calendars. We know that this report is going to the General Issues Committee on October 16th. Starting to get stressed out because it sounds like it's a long way away, but it's not. But it's structured in a way where there's a staff recommendation report. So that's the really sort of that's the sort of city staff structure, right? We've got a template we need to follow there. The table of contents that I just walked you through is for Appendix A, that full annual report, that public-facing report. And the staff recommendation and report is always kind of like a distilled down version of that. We're also proposing this year, and we'd love to hear what you think about this, the idea of a 2-page summary of the report with highlights, because we're really thinking about, how do we, because it's a lot of information. You can see that already, right, from all the priority indicators Trevor walked you through. How do we start to share that information out so that it's digestible for everybody? You could share it as committee members. We can share it when we're out there engaging with community. We get more people paying attention to what we're doing through the strategy. And then, of course, Appendix C is that very detailed chart. So we want to provide both, right? The sort of the Coles Notes version, but also very detailed information for people who are eager to jump in and learn more. So that's the report and the plan for the report. And I think we're now going to shift over to any questions that any of you have on the indicators and/or the structure of the annual report.
Raise your hand and I will get it down on thing, just get the list.
Great, thanks. Thanks, OCCI staff, for all the great work that you guys do. I have a lot of questions. I'm going to try to limit myself to a couple and then maybe try to hop on for a second time. I wanted to start out today. Our presentation doesn't have any CIAP proposed metrics. They're all CEEP proposed metrics. Does that indicate that work is further along on the CEEP than the impact adaptation list? You know, like we went through all the themes that are part of the emissions plan themes, but we didn't go through each theme in detail for the impact adaptation side today. That's sort of the interim progress update.
Yeah, thanks, Lucia, and sorry if it wasn't clear. So half of that presentation was about the climate change impact adaptation plan. So we broke it out by the first slides were innovating our industry, transforming our buildings, natural environment, changing how we move, revolutionizing renewables, and then we went into resilient theme number 1, which is built environment. So those are so it flips over in terms of there's the adaptation plan, that's actually a big chunk of our indicators that we want to start tracking and reporting on as it relates to, I mentioned the people and health theme, for example. That's people and health in our adaptation plan around surveillance of hospital morbidity, mortality related to extreme heat events. There's indicators related to climate resiliency retrofits, low impact development. So there's definitely lots of indicators there.
Yeah, perfect. Just wanted to make sure that it wasn't super clear in the presentation that we kind of blended from one to the other. I had a feeling that was probably the case, but I just wanted to check and make sure that that was sort of a full holistic overview there. I wanted to go back to, I've got my slide notes here. Slide 9.
Sorry, it was really frozen or something, I'm not sure why. No, it's fine. It's slide 9.
Slide 9.
There we go. Slow.
There it is. Yeah.
Perfect, thanks. So 2 questions. One is Hamilton Renewable Power Inc. isn't mentioned in this slide. I would think that would be a big lever for the city to pull, given that the current investment is in methane capture from a landfill. In case anyone in the committee is not aware, there is less and less methane coming out of that landfill, and so it's losing more and more money every year. One would think that would be an opportunity to invest in some renewables. I've heard, Councillor Clark kind of lament that it's a money losing. It might be an opportunity to pitch essentially something that would be revenue generating, and just curious why it wasn't sort of mentioned as sort of a corporate action here.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. We can definitely do a better job of clarifying that. In my mind, that would be rolled into the total megawatts of renewable energy installed from the corporation, because the Hamilton Renewable Power Inc., although it's a separate company, it's within the structure of the city of Hamilton. But I agree, we could probably, and what we'll think about moving forward is just kind of thinking beyond that too, is megawatts of renewable energy, by either type and or by company, because there's Hamilton Renewable Power Inc., but there's also Hamilton Community Enterprises, which they don't have, well, yes they do, sorry, I shouldn't say that. They have distributed renewable energy sources. So I think it's just a matter of, they're all roped in terms of the total megawatts under the corporation, but duly noted, and we'll break that out, and we'll want to break that out. Yeah, I struggle between so much information and then breaking out of for council presentations, but I agree for the big report, we can break those out.
And final one for this slide here, the green hydrogen feasibility study, who is that for and who is that being done by?
Feasibility study. Yeah, good question. And I think we've actually pivoted on this a little bit. And this is now rolled up into our Hamilton Region Decarbonization Hub, which we are partnering with industry, as well as a company or an organization called the Transition Accelerator to make a pitch to the Ontario FedDev organization for some funding to look at using green hydrogen as the base fuel of clean energy generation, but that not being the only source. So that's actually a bit of a, not necessarily a typo. It's proposed in our plan, but it's now evolved into a not just green hydrogen, a Hamilton Region Decarbonization Hub, which includes a green hydrogen feasibility study. And that's, I guess internally it's being led by Cyrus Tirani, which is our Chief Digital and Innovation Officer, with Linda and Norm Schlehan as kind of the co-directors leading that initiative.
Can I suggest that green hydrogen here is not a typo and that should be front and center? I'm very familiar with the work of the Transition Accelerator. 350 has been fairly concerned by the fact that in Edmonton in particular, they've been pushing for blue hydrogen, which is not a climate solution, folks, that is methane. Gray hydrogen, similarly, methane-based, pink hydrogen, turquoise, there's all sorts of colors. There's only one we're really interested in, right? And that's green hydrogen. So I think it's really important that as far as the OCCI is concerned, that we keep green hydrogen front and center as opposed to sort of this nebulous decarbonization, because unfortunately we've seen that other levels of government will fund things which are not truly green projects.
And maybe just, I know we've got some few other questions, but I'll just totally agree, and I'll just make a quick comment in that that's exactly why we wanted to set up the decarbonization hub, and we are, if the Ontario FedDev funding doesn't come through, we'll definitely pivot and look for other sources of funding and other strategies, because that green hydrogen piece is such a key area to fully decarbonize our steel sector, because right now it is proposed to be fueled by methane gas, right? So we need that technology now to fully decarbonize our steel sector in Hamilton, so yeah.
Thanks if you can put me on for a second time.
Thanks. So I'm just going to ask a more, I guess, overarching question, but I really like the idea of the 2-page summary. I'm just wondering about, in the full report, is there sort of a narrative up front? And why I'm wondering about this is because I think it's really important to sort of, before you get into all the metrics, to ground it specifically for Hamiltonians who may see this report, may not see it, but may only like kind of look through it really briefly. Like, why is this important to them? How this is all working, like how these investments will actually work to make their lives better, like tangibly, not just in terms of metrics that are going to tick corporate boxes, which are important, but I think to people on the ground wondering why, when people are struggling, we're spending money on these things, like there needs to be something to say that we're doing this because of this. It's like, for instance, the air conditioner pilot, giving people air conditioners, that's good. But just as an example, like, are they Energy Star air conditioners? Like, was there anything around that? Was there anything around the refrigerants? Like, just if this lens is part of it, and if that program is from this office, then just, okay, so this is an example of how this could help Hamiltonians going forward, how we're going to make the community better, like why this all matters to them, because I think that'll be a lot easier for folks around the table to then put out and say, okay, this is why we're excited about this, and there's a lot more that you can get into, but ultimately speaking, this is part of a vision for Hamilton in the future that's going to be, a good place to live and raise a family and grow old and all those good things.
Can I just, thank you very much for that. Yeah, I really appreciate what you're sharing, Jeff, and I think for us that's important too. We want to be able to do a better job of it's storytelling, right? It's helping people to understand why we're doing the things that we're doing. And I can say, I'm going to say this, in our first year, I think we had some sort of lived lessons around, how it can be challenging if you don't kind of get ahead of the storytelling and make sure people understand why, certain initiatives are being supported and the value and the impact that they bring on the ground. So absolutely, that's definitely a big part of what we want to and need to do moving forward. So I think we'll definitely take that to heart in the way we structure particularly the front end of the report to hopefully draw people in and keep them reading more of it, right? I think that's really important. And I just, you raised the issue of the air conditioners, and that's an interesting one, and one maybe we want to have more conversations about around this table, because I think that was a good example of some of the realities that we're facing as a community, because climate impacts are upon us. So we're finding ourselves, and I think Councillor Cassar and Councillor Wilson could speak to this probably even more, where there are acute impacts that we're experiencing already, and pressure from community to respond. So how do we make sure we're doing our best to align everything so that we're addressing those acute impacts, but we're doing our best to ensure that's happening in as climate resilient a manner as possible. And the example you've used was a tough one. I can tell you that we do know with that program, and they've layered that funding on top of a program that already exists through Ontario Works. Anyone who qualifies for one of those subsidies will at least be getting some good information that we found online and pulled together that provides people with really solid information around when you're shopping for your air conditioner, this is what you should look for, here's how you should size it based on, some really pragmatic details to help ensure that, fingers crossed, we're getting people choosing the right unit and hopefully an energy efficient one. So thanks for your comments.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Linda. Juliana.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, I had a question. There was a lot of potential indicators presented and shared, and so my question is, how are staff going to be confirming those potential indicators, and then what is the sort of decision-making process that will result in the actual indicators that we're collecting data on? Or are we sort of at the stage where you're looking for the data, what's available, and we might be selecting indicators based on available data? And then the other question, I do have some comments about some of the specific indicators and what data might exist or what might be trickier to find. How do you want that information shared? Is it sort of right now through through answers right now, or is there a better process for that?
I'll start on the first question, and then I think the second question is really up to this group about, and I'm open and flexible of receiving ongoing comments for sure. Okay, so the long list of potential indicators is we currently have a very, very long Excel-based spreadsheet, and we've facilitated internal discussions through the director level steering committee. We've gotten some both positive and negative comments from the directors about what data is possible, what's not possible, what's potentially in the future, but not right now. So we've taken all of that information, and so I would say all of the indicators that you see now, some have been left off because the directors were like, just it's not possible. And so now we have the grueling task of going to those, what we call the data stewards or the data experts, to really drill down, because I've done this more than a couple times throughout the years, and these data people, like, they need really specific asks. Like if I say like megawatts of renewable power, they're gonna say like, ask me 5 different questions that I am not even thinking about. So we're in that process now, and the reason why we wanted to, one, because the previous meeting of the advisory committee wanted to start diving into these indicators, and we definitely want to get that both qualitative and quantitative feedback from this group. And so as we go and talk to the data stewards, really the questions are about, and we have fields for this, is like data quality, high quality, medium quality, low quality. Data, is it even available? How often do you track? Like when we look at the transportation sources, the modal splits, we only get that data every 5 years, right? So we're kind of drilling down into the data right now, and based on that feedback, that's how I think how we'll decide what comes, for example, this year, is really based on data quality and data availability from those data experts as we as we get those discussions. And then in terms of ongoing feedback, I mean, I think maybe I'll just open that up to maybe the co-chair to ask, and Beatrice, if you have any feedback on how can the advisory committee provide feedback on an ongoing basis. And I mean, I'm open to just email me anytime. I'm always open to receiving emails, but maybe there's a better process than that the group can think about.
Something I'm thinking that might be of value, like, because that's a long list. And I think the kind of, you mentioned the Excel spreadsheet, Trevor, that you have that identifies like which are the ones that you already have access to, which are internal kind of corporate data that you can pull, and that like the advisory group is going to not be of not much help to you because that's internal corporate information. But then there's but then kind of it would be nice to know like, okay, yes, this data we have, yes, we have this one, maybe, definitely don't have this one. They're going to kind of be like, if it was kind of like a red, green, yellow kind of indicators that you have, like that you have this data, that it's good quality data. That would be really helpful. And then for the community side, like you were mentioning about looking at corporations within the city of Hamilton that have net zero strategies or climate action strategies. And then it would be really interesting to kind of understand from you what data sources you already know about that you might be able to access, and then sharing where your data sources are thus far with the advisory group so that they can identify if there are additional data sources that would be of value to helping to kind of corral that type of information.
Thank you Gabby, for raising that, because I think that is sort of the differentiation there. There are some very community-facing indicators, and I know that's where we really need your help. And I think there are some pretty tangible ones. I'll give you an example. Our office has agreed to do our best to track the 50,000 trees planted per year target, but you start to think about that one. We know forestry, they keep very careful records. They'll be able to tell us whether they've committed to getting 20,000 of those 50,000 planted. We've got a strategy where we'll be reaching out to organizations that we know are out there planting trees. But then we're also racking our brains about how else might we be able to, in creative ways, gather more information around who's planting trees out there. So I think there are a number of examples like that where I think we could definitely come back with maybe clearer requests to all of you for advice and input, maybe even help in collecting some of the information. And this is really the first year, like last year, we very much focused on the corporate indicators. So we're really trying to look at this year, how do we do a better job of integrating some of these community-facing indicators as well. So it might be interesting to hear from all of you about whether you think there are some that are higher priority that we should be focusing our energy on this year. And then over time, we'll try to keep on building up with your help and expanding the list of community-facing indicators and our ability to, in a more comprehensive way, gather information, because that's important. And it's I think what we're always saying to people, this is a community-wide plan. So we need to make sure we're tracking what's happening on the community side and pushing for change there.
Yes, okay. And Suzanne, just to confirm up, it's Suzanne, right? Susan, sorry. Sorry? Sue, sorry. Was that directly related to the data information? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you for clarifying some of that information, for the good questions about the data, because you don't even want to see the questions that I have. Just, just trying to understand, I was looking at some of the tree things and trying to figure out how do you count, how are you actually tracking those trees? So, if you have 3 organizations out, at one event or something and they plant 100 trees, then each organization count that as 100 trees, so then there are 300 trees instead of 100, that sort of thing. So I was wondering what existed, so this is helping to clarify a little bit of that, but there's a bunch of information I kind of really need to know still. So I was just curious about the tree, very specifically, the tree part as well.
Yeah, that's maybe not necessarily, well, that and many of these indicators, like how we're actually going to track them and do a QA, QC, keeps me up at night. But to your specific, like the tree tracking is, so we know, we have a pretty good sense of corporately, like our target is 20,000 trees this year to plant. And so in my mind, this is where we are engaging with forestry. There are tools out there. For example, there's an iTree tool. So there's this iTree tool where people can take a picture of their tree and upload it onto the iTree database, and then we as the city have access to it. That's just one of several potential like community-wide tree tracking tools. And so what I think, it needs to be an innovative software tracking solution, such as iTree or something else. If others know of anything, please let us know, and we'll pass that along internally. But then there's also a big coordination piece as well. And so we keep on throwing around this idea of, before Environment Hamilton had an air and trees task force where the city, conservation authorities, Green Venture, all came around and just talked about their tree planting initiatives. And so that was kind of a crude way of just saying, okay, you're going to plant 5,000, you're going to plant 2,000. And so again, it's not perfect, but it's better than what we're doing now, I guess.
Right? Mary Ellen?
I have a question, sort of a two-part question about the potential indicators, and you've been nibbling around my question, but it was specifically whether you've identified criteria for determining which of those potential indicators are good indicators, like are not just data quality, are they easy to communicate? And related to that is, do you intend to have a desired state for each of the indicators? And coming back to the trees, for me, the more useful indicator is the percentage forest cover, because that data is relatively easy to get, and you've set a target by 2050. And so someone looking at that indicator could say, okay, here's where we are now, here's 2050. So will each indicator have a desired state?
Really great question. Complicated one too, because I think, so we have a pretty good sense through our community energy and emissions plan what our desired state is, because we've done the modeling through a model called City Insight. So for example, I'll use buildings. Our desired state is to achieve the net zero target, which is essentially to retrofit 98% of our existing buildings to achieve a 30% minimum reduction per building of energy efficiency. So that's our desired state, is like, that's the future. It's more hard, and a lot of other municipalities are struggling with what's our desired state of a climate resiliency desired state. Like, when does a city become resilient to the impacts of climate change? It's a tough question. And so we are working with a cohort of municipalities through ICLEI Canada. It's a global organization and have a Canadian arm there. And so it's Ottawa, us, and Durham region who are all interested in what you're talking about. Is, in my mind, those are like community-based outcomes, right? And so what is our community-based outcome? And specifically to your tree planting example, we are in the process of paying for and doing, I don't know, is it every year? I can't remember. Yeah, maybe every couple years or every 5 years, using what's called LiDAR. And so that does a whole analysis of tree canopy cover across the city to a fairly reasonable, accurate sense. So we'll track every year, did we achieve the 50,000 per year tree planting target? And then every 3 to 5 years, that will be our citywide analysis using the LiDAR radar that will say, is our tree canopy actually growing in the right direction? So trees we got, but I mean, for example, the population health statistics in terms of what's our desired state? No one goes to the hospital, I think, right? Is that our desired state? So it's, yeah, it's not a perfect answer. There's some desired states I think that we have a good grasp on, but others we don't.
Okay. And I have one other question. You mentioned the formation of the staff teams and the leadership team. You may or may not know the answer to this. Will the members of those teams have their role on the climate teams identified in their performance measures?
Nice.
That's a good question. I can confirm for you that I do in mine. Yes, as part of my performance evaluations, but that's a very good question as far as the rest of them, and as a broader question around municipal staff and what kinds of requirements are there. You know, we've had conversations within our team around the need at least for some voluntary Climate 101 training across the municipality. But I think the idea of making it part of, we're actively working to normalize changes to how the city functions to take into account climate. So in many respects, what you're proposing seems like a pretty logical next step. I'm certainly happy to go to RGM and senior leadership and suggest that's something that needs to be happening. But I can confirm for you that for me, and I think fair to say for the climate team, that's definitely
No, it's the
there
other
for
folks
us.
that
Yeah.
you want to make sure it's part of their job.
Yeah, and I will add, and I think this is really a good thing, our Public Works Department has been very proactive on this front. So there's wonderful work happening within Public Works. They have those, Climate 101 training modules that staff are watching. They're starting to do active work on Climate Lens and applying that to their decision making. So we're starting to see that happen, but it does need to be in a far more comprehensive way applied right across the corporation. Yeah.
Thank you for that overview. It's really good. I liked what Jeff was saying earlier about just sort of using the introduction or the first part of the report, but I was thinking maybe you were talking about more of an educational approach, because I really think that's a big part of what's needed, certainly not people here, but across the city and so on, just to have a clearer understanding of that. I know at Mohawk College, you were just talking about, Climate 101. I know that they recently added to their program evaluation that programs need to have something in it around climate change and climate justice. So every time a program is reviewed, they will be looking for that and asking the programs to include it. And that includes all across the college, not just the ones that are specifically connected to that, but programs like mine, which is social work, right? So really essential. The other thing I wanted to mention, I saw in the, somewhere in here, something around the climate justice framework. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about what that is and if I could hear a little bit more about it.
I'll start, but I think Beatrice is distracted. So Beatrice is leading the charge on our climate justice framework, and it's very early days with that piece. So there's a project charter being developed, and I think we'll soon, in fact, we could even have Beatrice maybe be scheduled into a future meeting so that you could get an overview presentation of where we're headed with that piece. If you're interested in getting a flavor for where we're going, and maybe we can share with Gabby as the co-chair to push this information out to all of you. A report did go to our LRT subcommittee where we started to look at, how could we start to apply a climate justice lens to aspects of the LRT project. And if you have a look at that report, Beatrice has done some great research, and it'll start to show you some of the foundational elements that we're working to integrate into that climate justice framework. And it's really important, right? Because it's that whole idea of the fact that we're not all equally impacted by the climate crisis, and we need to be paying attention to that, and that really needs to be informing our action on the ground on both mitigation and adaptation side. So I would suggest that, and maybe we can get I don't know if you want to add any more, Beatrice, on the, Shelley's just asking about the climate justice framework, but I think maybe a future
Yes.
presentation is a good idea.
I think so, very much so. I can say that we have been working So we've been working on a climate justice project charter, and we are at the stage where we're starting to look at how to host some workshops in the community. In the sense we're engaging community trusted allies to do this work. So we're just beginning that kind of exploration. So everybody can stay tuned because we're going to definitely need some support here. And I have heard that there's a lot of interest in creating a working group here. So I shouldn't say anything yet, but I think we're all very much interested in that piece. So there will be, I can definitely do a presentation for people. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's really important, I think it's really important that we think about it not just as one piece of it, but almost as a let's look at everything given climate justice. For example, we've been talking a lot about trees. If they put more trees in Ancaster, it's just not going to have the same impact as putting more trees in the Beasley neighborhood. So so in other words, I think that the justice part of it shouldn't be a piece of it. It should be the overarching, let's look at everything given that. And even when we're doing data collection, doesn't homelessness and food insecurity and those indicators also have a role to play in connecting, because it is all connected. And so I think when we're looking at indicators, those also should be, seniors at risk, children, and so on. Yeah, thanks.
Sorry. Yeah, and any feedback you have on that would be much appreciated. And we have been trying to do some work this year to integrate equity considerations, climate justice considerations into indicators. And I just also want to share with you, and I think this is a really good news story, if you look at our urban forest strategy, there is that recognition of the need for equitable distribution of the canopy cover. And so you'll see, I'm looking at Juliana down the way, Green Venture's been doing fantastic work on this front already. And I think you're going to see more because with that refined sort of measuring of canopy cover, we're, fingers crossed, hoping to see tools emerging out of the city that'll enable all of us to drill right down to the neighborhood level and see what is the percent canopy cover. Do we have neighborhoods that are way lower than the 40%? And the 40% is important because that's going to help combat urban heat island effect. But I think it's going to generate lots of conversation and help us with information to guide on the ground action that will help us to make that climate justice piece reality. So there's one example of that where I think we're on the right track, but please keep on raising those here because we need to have those conversations and make sure if we're missing some of them that we're paying attention. Yeah.
So I just put down as an action item for a future meeting, the presentation and a focus on the climate justice piece. Jillian.
Thank you. I guess I have two quick comments and a question. I'll first say, great work. I empathize a lot with the collection of multiple KPIs. And in looking at all of them under all of the various topics that you guys have, I think it could help you, putting my corporate hat on, it could help you certainly with your approach to the GIC leadership team and looking for your colleagues to eventually have more accountability for also collecting that information to categorize those KPIs, because in just listening to it, some of the themes that I took away when you're looking at all of those KPIs under each section, you're talking about education, you're talking about investment, you're talking about the application and use of something, and then you're also talking about impact. And maybe also from our chat, we're also talking about exclusive community-based KPIs. So I think if you're approaching other leadership persons and wanting to get them to understand and contextualize the KPIs, it could be to your advantage to further categorize them in a way that indicates this is the kind of action or this is what we're actually looking to get out of this grouping of KPIs. And then maybe frankly, then you can have more direct discussions with your compatriots and saying, and yes, we need your departments and teams to start being accountable for this. And then you lead that into the governance kind of conversations. So that, maybe, and those could be those categories, or maybe there's other ones that you want to look at, but I think that could help. My other question is, or comment is 100% do a summary, a 2-page summary. And my question is, in doing that, and also in going to the GIC, how much work, or what is your ability to also get to a place of benchmarking and saying like, hey, and in this context of all of these KPIs and performance, and this is all, you know, great or aspirational or, you know, progress, to get your leadership people and decision makers and funders and, you know, people to get on side with your plan, can you give them more context that benchmarks Hamilton maybe against other municipalities, and also not just look at it from, you know, the topics that you guys have identified in your roadmap, but also comparatively within, you know, economic development size, like kind of get more into the habit of maybe as you go forward benchmarking to also further incentivize people to understand, okay, this is really the impact. Hamilton is a laggard compared to a city of equitable size, or Hamilton, because all of this sounds great. When you do something, I think it's easy for senior persons that don't have the same context to say, we're doing something that's fantastic, it's a great story. But then when you contextualize it to someone of greater progress or lesser progress, then that really incentivizes them to say, actually, I've just realized that my, I don't know, cybersecurity program is a laggard compared to a, you know, sorry, that's a bad example. Restrict it from the, sorry, I didn't even, that just came into my brain. Or, you know, my program of, that I want to progress is a laggard compared to a municipality of an equal size or equally funded. So anyway, that's, maybe you have an answer about benchmarking or eventual state that you want to get to, but that's thoughts that came to me.
I can start, and Trevor, you may want to jump in. I'm just thinking about things like the CDP reporting process that may help. This is a really great point, and I think it's important because we're already thinking about that. And it's, I'm going to say it again, it's that, and I'm going to keep talking about seeing the forest for the trees, right? The climate forest for the trees. Because I think over time, we need to be able to do that. We need to be able to communicate back to council and to the broader community, you know, are we making progress? Where are we sitting? Is Hamilton where it needs to be so that we're becoming more climate resilient? We're getting to where we need to be in time. So I'm going to add the sort of timeline piece too, because, you know, that's something, and we would love to get feedback from all of you on pieces like that as well. You know, net zero by 2050. Right? I mean, do we need to have a conversation about pieces like that? But also, you know, yeah, I think figuring out how do we do a better job? How do we figure out impactful ways to report back on, are we where we need to be? Are we showing leadership? I mean, I think that's another really important question. But thank you for sharing that. I think those are all critical pieces we need to be thinking about. And Trevor, I don't know if you want to weigh in on the sort of global reporting side. I don't know if it may have some relevance here.
I guess I would just say, are you guys thinking about how benchmarking can help you accelerate the, you know, resource support, the unlocking of capital for your initiatives as you go forward? And maybe it's a possibility as you talk to the City of Ottawa and the City of Durham to say, do you guys want to benchmark ourselves against each other and or other municipalities and use that to motivate the people that make decisions about the future of this program?
Yeah, that's super important, I think. And I'll say, I think we do that subconsciously already. Like, for example, like the Better Homes Hamilton program to launch, we gave kind of a scan to council to say, like, here's other municipalities that are doing this. So municipalities routinely do that on like policies and programs because, yeah, municipalities are interesting where they're a little afraid to be the first one out of the gate, but they definitely don't want to be a laggard. So that middle seems to be a sweet spot for municipalities. But that same principle, or even more, I really like, yeah, looking at standardization of indicators. I think to do that, we would need some top-down direction, like to formally do that. And I'll say we work with and you use the example of Ottawa and Durham, like as we develop these adaptation objective indicators, well, definitely that in my mind is the start of that kind of standardization and benchmarking across specific, like, hey, how are you guys doing on people in health, for example, or tree planting? So I'll say right now, we don't do that, but it's a good advice to take back for sure.
And I'm just looking at the time, because we do have the working groups discussion. Oh, yeah, thank you. I'm just looking at the time, because we do have the working groups discussion to go as well. So I still have, just on the agenda, Jess online, if you can just unmute just to ask your question. And then I have Matthew as well. And then we'll move on to the next agenda item. I'll also, just before we wrap this up, I will speak to some of the action items that I've heard coming out of this discussion, and then I'd love to get some input on additional action items that people would like to add to the list from this discussion just before we move on to the other agenda items. So Jess.
I'm so sorry. Jess is not online right now, but I can read his questions.
Okay.
Okay. So. Okay. So the first question was, are these indicators or trends? Shouldn't an indicator be static and then a trend be assessed accordingly?
Yeah, I'll take that one first. The indicators are both static as indicators. For example, we want to track annual megawatts, but then we also want to look at trend analysis of that indicator, right? So we want to make sure the trends are trending in the right direction in terms of total megawatts of renewable energy increase, total number of tree planting per year going up, energy efficiency, greenhouse gas emissions going down. So I think the indicators are the indicators, and although there will be new indicators emerging out of the strategies, we of course want to look at doing our own trend analysis to report to council to say, are we trending in the right direction for those indicators? Does that make sense to everyone? Yeah, okay. Seeing nods.
So just actually two other questions. Is the plan to nest these indicators under each target? I'll leave it there.
So yes, like we want to nest the indicators under each like theme area, as well as the specific targets or the desired future state of that certain model target. And we can do that for some, but we can't do that for all of them.
Is a two-page summary the best way to engage the general public, or should the exec summary serve as a distilled version and a different engagement plan be considered to get the message out to the broader community? So Instagram, Facebook posts, and of course, that was answer that yes, that's going to happen for sure. But does somebody else want to say?
One thing I would add quickly, though, and I think we would love feedback from any of you, we're having conversations within our staff team, even about this year, and how we can get out there and raise more awareness about the fact that Hamilton has a climate action strategy, because lots of people don't know. So we're talking about pop-up events where we get out into the community. We've had lovely offers from players like the Hamilton Public Library, ways to get out into locations in the community. But it would be really helpful to hear input from all of you, because the other thing that we're thinking about as well is how do we, because trying to engage somebody in a conversation about climate can be, you probably all know, it can be really challenging. So we're also looking at, how can we give people things to think about? Because that's often the other question. We might have people who kind of know they need to be paying attention to climate. They might not know a lot about Hamilton's climate action strategy, but they'll say to us, what can I do? Like, what's something that I could go home and do to help? So even those kinds of ideas, I think we would love to hear from you on that. If you've, maybe even, positive impacts you've had in just engaging with people around you. So we are trying to figure out moving forward. We know we need to have a more impact on that front, engaging and mobilizing community members.
Matthew?
So yeah, I have actually a few questions, but maybe the first one's sort of building off this discussion now. I think when you release a bunch of indicators, you run the risk of it being a lot of data and very hard to maybe read. A lot of these indicators are also things that are maybe hard for a lot of people to visualize. Like, I don't know what 40% tree coverage looks like or what that means. Is that good? Is that bad? Compared to others. So I think sort of building on the benchmarking comment and like the trend analysis, it'd be really useful to put these indicators in more context. You know, how do we look like compared to Toronto? How do we look like compared to another city? How do we look like compared to last year? And if there's a target, you know, are we on track for that target or not, right? So if we have a target for, you know, 2050 or 2030, and we draw a straight line from now until then, is our 2024 number on track or not? So I know a lot of corporations do this, kind of like a year on year, and then like against the target. And I think that could be useful. I know certainly for myself, a lot of these indicators, I don't really know like what's good or bad maybe. So that could be useful, one comment. And then also I was wondering, kind of for helping us to determine what indicators might be useful, do you have any requirements for any indicators, like for your green bond application, any standards that you conform to, or any of these indicators requirements beyond just the annual report, and you have to follow certain methodologies?
Yeah, and all great comments and questions, Matthew. And so I'll make a note too, just in terms of the benchmarking, and like, I'll go back to like, yes, I totally agree that it would be useful to benchmark, for example, like what's our tree canopy cover compared to other municipalities. And we did that with the urban forest strategy. But like, for example, like our hospital admission rates, like how many people are going to Hamilton hospitals versus other hospitals, like I don't know, I just get like, this is so much information, and we're trying to get other information from other municipalities too about that. Like I just, in terms of this year, I just want to try to set expectations. Like I don't think we're going to get there this year, but maybe in future years. And then in terms of your standards, I would say, and Gabby, I'd love to get your feedback on this too, because like we, like in Ontario, like there's very little legislative requirements or standards or protocols to do any of this. So we follow global protocols through the, and Matthew, you and I were emailing before about the GPC, the Global Protocol for Community-Wide Greenhouse Gas Emissions Reporting. And there are other, I think, sector-specific protocols for like public health. I'll use public health as an example. Is not necessarily a protocol, but it's called the ACES data, where public health epidemiology, they know how to access that data, they know what to look for. I'm not a public health professional, or I'm not an epidemiologist. So with those types of protocols and those like sector specific ones, we're gonna rely, I think, on the data experts to get us that data. But in terms of like a climate change, like ISO standard, for example, like I'm not aware of any provincial protocols or standards or anything that we need to follow or should follow. We just look at best practices globally, and then look at what other municipalities are doing in terms of how are you doing this? Hey, we should copy you.
I have added to a future meeting in some of the action items coming to this, a benchmarking discussion, because there is, it would make, like, I know that a Clean Air Partnership, we've been trying to do some benchmarking across municipalities on the implementation of actions within their climate action plan. I will admit it's a focus far more on mitigation actions than it is on adaptation actions. That doesn't mean that we're where we need to be, but it's kind of like, I think that broader kind of benchmarking discussion might be something that's needed at a future meeting.
Can I just one more piece quickly in response to the comments that you've made were really helpful. We're also having conversations about that dashboard piece. So what, because we've got that huge long laundry list of priority indicators that we're tracking and talking to staff about, but you know, we don't necessarily want all of those to appear on a public facing dashboard. So I think you could all provide us with really helpful input when we get to that point of what really should be there. You know, what are some of the key indicators that are really going to help to communicate to the broader community how we're doing, how we're making progress. So I think I would love if we could continue to have that conversation.
Yeah, and maybe those indicators look different for the public as well. Like, right, 8 million tons of CO2e, like what does that mean? But if you say like, okay, that's X amount of cars per year, that could be like the public sort of indicator. And totally take your point, Trevor, about it being hard to do this. So I think then what would be useful is adding the methodology to what's released, because it would be good to know how are greenhouse gases being calculated for the city of Hamilton. When you say net zero companies, like there's a lot of different net zero standards, which one are you following? And then just my last comment, if that's okay, or question, is on the report, I didn't see anything about climate risks, and we sort of talked about climate impacts that the city is currently facing. Is there a section about risks? I'm thinking risks in terms of like human health and human impact, but also monetary risk as well. Has there been any efforts to communicate that in the report?
Yeah, monetary risks, interesting one. So in our climate change impact adaptation plan, in our website, you'll see that we've conducted a previously climate vulnerability and risk assessment, or VRA, and that VRA essentially uses global and regional climate modeling downscaled to the local level. And so we reported that to council in 2021, I think. Wow, time flies. And already that's out of date, right? And so we used a portion of AR5 and a bit of AR4 to do that modeling. And I shouldn't say we, like the consultant did it for us. And so you do the climate modeling, you look at your projected climate scenarios, and we actually have some pretty useful infographics about like projected number of extreme heat days over 30 degrees, and we have a bar that shows it's going to go increase by triple-fold by 2050, for example, right? And I've been thinking about it, and I think it's just a good comment that although we reported it in the past, we should continue to report on it, right? Because that's just a report that was 2 years ago, right? So we should think about how we better communicate climate risks. And I will say some of the actions in the indicators.
Sorry, Trevor, if I can, I'm just looking at the time, and I just want to make sure we get on to all the agenda items if I'd like. But this leads towards one of the working group kind of conversations about digging down into the details on that. Lucia, you wanted to add one more thing into it?
I wanted to mention two specific items just for public consumption because they're topical based on events that have happened at council and things that I think that this committee needs to sort of bring out. Around the indicators on slides 12 and 13, I'm particularly alarmed to see the proposal to track emergency kits given out for extreme heat. There's been a lot of discussion at council about extreme heat. You guys might have seen some of the discourse around the AC program. I think this is a particularly dangerous metric to keep in here, even at a draft stage. And the reason for that, and I'm going to quote from a CBC article here, the most important risk factor for heat-related deaths, not having air conditioning. A New York team found among people exposed to heat in their own homes, 0 deaths occurred between 2013 and 2022 among those with a working operational AC, while every other death was among people who didn't have access to functioning AC in their unit. And I'd hazard a guess that a lot of those people who died got an emergency kit. So I think that we really, really need to track the number of people who are living in units that are not safe in the summertime and get away from sort of a charity model where we are counting things that we know are insufficient to help the most vulnerable people in our community. So I want to put that out there. Kind of on a similar line, but maybe a little bit less intense. On slides 5 and 9, there's references to money spent as a good indicator for what we're doing. I think this is dangerous in 2 ways, and I would suggest we remove it even in draft. One is that we can spend a great deal of money and have insufficient results to keep people safe, kind of like the AC program. And we could also spend a whole ton of money and get very little result. Like there's not a clear relation, but what there is a clear opportunity for is for detractors of spending on climate impacts and people who are seeing their residential property tax bills go up. And if we focus on money as a key metric, whether it's federal, provincial, or local, people will resent that number that they've spent if they don't see how they're benefiting from it. So I think that it's not super helpful for us, and we're better to focus on the actual metrics that are going to help people's lives. So I just wanted to mention this now because I know we're going to talk about working groups, but this is going to carry on ahead before our next meeting, and I think those are two important points.
Okay, great. Excellent. So action items, I've got listed out. So an Excel spreadsheet on the indicators. We can share that. Actually, Beatrice, if you could do me a favor and you can pull up the hub, because we can always use that as a place where we have information sharing across the committee taking place. So I think there's certainly, I think kind of sharing that Excel spreadsheet and maybe a little bit more targeted at this Excel spreadsheet, Trevor, in terms of what help you're really looking for in terms of the gaps that you have and where you think you know where you could use the most help. I would also have on my action item a future presentation on climate justice framework, and I have a benchmarking discussion as action items. Do others kind of action items come to? Yep, Matthew.
I think we were talking about how to facilitate feedback for the indicators. So maybe an action item is somebody coming up with a Google Doc or something, or a spreadsheet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, perfect. Any other action items that kind of, yep.
I'm just wondering, and I'm not sure if it's possible to share this, but the climate training 101 for staff, and just whether we could see that.
Okay. Any other action items? No? Okay, so some of the kind of top level, Beatrice, if you could just pull it down to go down into the working groups that got identified at the last first meeting. And here's a little bit of a suggestion I have. I'll throw it out there and you can let me know if this makes sense to you, and if not, because we may not have everyone in the room or online at the meeting, I thought maybe if we kind of send out an email with a survey for where people can sign up to each of the working groups so that everybody can have equal access to that kind of sign up mechanism. And then also, so that you can sign up to the working groups that you would like to participate in. Yes, there will be some indications of which are the working groups that are getting the most momentum and which we should probably tackle first. So that prioritization could take place via the sign up mechanism. But I was also thinking it would be really good to get everybody's input on which working groups they think are the most important, even if they're not participating in them. So there would be a prioritization that everyone does for the working groups, and then there would be a sign up that people do for the working groups, and that could be all done online, and it can be reported back to everybody via email prior to the next meeting. Lucia.
So I had some discussions with folks on this committee based on our last discussion, and just sort of sizing it. We got something like 26 members and only so many working groups that are realistically going to meet. I know I'd been behind some of the discussion around having a technical working group, and I think that framework is going to be a little bit difficult. So I'd like to actually propose narrowing that down significantly and propose putting together a working group that only reviews Hamilton's climate action strategy, how it was created, what it's based on, what's updates, what are the metrics, and just really only focuses on that piece of our committee's work in all its aspects, technical, communication, et cetera. But that way, those two documents, that's what this working group is going to meet to discuss. And so that would maybe replace some of the ones that are listed there.
Okay, and it would be really great that I would love to kind of, if you're, let's say for folks who are able or willing to take a kind of because each of the working groups will need to have co-chairs associated with them, because it'll be too hard to kind of coordinate with all members. So if you are interested in being a co-chair for one of the working groups, if you can let me know, because I think one of the good things that we'll need to do to give some clarity to people on what is this working group going to do and what is it going to look at. Not that that has to be nailed down at the beginning, but just to give people a little sense in the signups for what is this working group going to look at. So a little bit of a blurb on each of the different working groups would be as part of the kind of outreach to the larger groups, to the whole group on what this working group is going to be looking at initially. Doesn't mean it has to be the final terms of reference, because each of the working groups will end up having to kind of create a terms of reference based on what they're looking to do or undertake, and what done looks like for that working group, at least in the short time frame, so that there could be clarity from the working groups to the larger committee, if that makes sense to folks. Yeah? Okay, so I'll kind of think a little bit, I'll work, if I can work with you on the technical kind of group and then get a little blurb on that discussion. And if there's others who are, can kind of put their hand up for any of the other working groups that they like to participate in, that would be really helpful to get a little blurb and send that out to the committee so that at least they have some information on what this working group is looking for. Does that sound okay? Is a process for sign up? Yeah? Okay, yep. Oh, yeah, gotcha. All right, perfect. All right. So I think that works for the working groups. Are there, now, just so I can see, are there anything that, like you said, like now that you see the working groups that came from the last meeting, is there anybody like, oh my God, I can't believe we didn't kind of highlight this working group? Gaps? 'Cause we have a pretty robust list. Oh, go ahead.
Not necessarily about the subject matter and what's in the working groups, but I think they might be a useful tool for a certain time period, but maybe not forever.
Absolutely.
So is this, I guess I'm wondering what's the time frame for the working group if we don't yet want to nail down exactly what they are?
I don't think we have to stick with any time frame and think of them as permanent working groups. I think we have the flexibility to make them be what they need to be in order to serve the needs of the committee. So there's definitely, and I would also say that not all working groups need to be active right from the beginning. You know, phasing them in would be probably a very logical thing to do, based on where there's most engagement, so that, because there's only a certain amount of time that everybody has, and that's a lot of working groups. So, and I should also mention, working groups do not have to be only the folks in like this committee. They can bring in experts so that you, the chairs and the committee can actually bring in the expertise that you need into that working group. It doesn't have to all just come from this committee. Yep.
Can you remind me, what was getting the municipal house in order?
Oh yeah, that's the corporation. That's kind of like if a working group who wants to kind of like review what's happening internally within the municipality. So like the fleets, the buildings in the municipality, the projects of the municipality of getting the municipal house in order. Yeah, I was putting out corporate in there, but then I thought that might confuse people on the corporate end too. Yep.
I was going to suggest 2 new working groups. Trevor kind of mentioned people and health. I think that's a pretty big one that we're missing out on there. And I also think we can do probably natural environment, agriculture and water, something that we're missing there.
We do have natural, can we just make that into the nature-based solutions and then kind of make it natural capital?
Yeah, that could be something.
Okay. And then people and health, how would that be, could that be rolled into the climate justice?
Can I add to the people and health piece? I think another piece that's missing maybe is food. I know there's food waste included, but I think there are other aspects of food, and maybe that can be rolled into people and health.
Because wouldn't that be like food security? Could we put that like into, because like we can put, if we put the under climate justice and then it kind of identifies what are the kind of main, what's the mandate of that working group? That could clarify the kind of scope of each of the working groups without creating more working groups. Would that suffice?
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Because I think it's up to the working groups to decide what is the mandate of that working group.
I think that makes sense. I mean, within climate justice, we could have people and health, and within that.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Was there a question online? Yes. Councilor Wilson.
Is there a line, is there a question online? Sorry, I don't see a hand up.
Sorry, Gabby, I can just jump in. I just put it in the chat. I just was a question, and I think this might have been what some of the technical piece might have included, but just given the size and scope of industrial emissions, I think some of the folks we have with us on the committee as well. And I just also say, yes, do they need review? Do they need engagement? Absolutely. But there are plans in place for transit. There are plans in place for building. There are plans in place for some of these things at different levels of maturity. One of the areas, just because it's fully within the private sector, is that industrial area. And so if we have folks on this committee, this broader team who have that expertise, that best practice sharing, whether that's relationship building, just identifying that as something that this committee may actually be better positioned to have some conversations or build some engagement around, given that we're a whole community committee here where we have representation from broad strokes, whereas it's not just a civic project or not just a city project. And I just didn't see that sphere in the working groups, what I might be missing if it falls under one of the existing ones.
I'm looking at it, I'm thinking that, I mean, would it fall under, what do people think? Should we put a separate industrial working group?
I would suggest that.
Yeah.
Because looking at the technical, and I'm guessing this is where the electricity generation energy system, primary energy system is located, which to your point, sorry, I can't remember the name. To your point, that's very broad space that needs to be broken down a little bit more. And that is where I'm guessing the industrial aspect of all this conversation is located currently. So.
Yeah. So it makes sense to have a separate working group for it. Lucia and then Sue.
Yeah, so given that we've got a really finite number of people, would it make more sense to break the groups into sort of functionally what they're doing, right? We have internal stuff that this group can do for the HCAS. We have corporate initiatives, then there's sort of external to the City of Hamilton initiatives, and then outside of that, there's sort of justice and engagement. And, you know, that's sort of focused on, are we talking to the public? Are we talking to private sector? Are we talking to the corporation, the City of Hamilton? Or are we talking amongst ourselves about what we need to do for the climate action strategy? So just maybe a thought is that even within that really broad umbrella, people could maybe come forward and say, oh yeah, well, for these external stakeholder engagement group, let's focus on industry, et cetera. Just a thought.
And I should just add, as all of these, like, this is a lot of working groups, not a lot of people. So one of the key things to keep in mind is that at some point, like, it doesn't all have to be active all at the beginning. There could just be a resource sharing functionality associated with the working groups, or kind of just identification of what's needed to dig into in this working groups once more capability or, you know, manpower can get put into the mix. So I think that's kind of looking like we can handle it that way. It doesn't, like, not all have to be fully engaged all the time right from the beginning. And then I saw Sue.
So just to clarify, what ended up happening with the health piece? Because I see a really great opportunity for, like, engaging, you know, the other institutions like that, the hospitals and whatever, who are working on, you know, plans to like incorporate sustainability things into their, so we could actually be bringing more people in, and that is going to solve a lot of the other, you know, things as well. So I just wondered what ended up happening there. I just want clarification.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of my understanding, and this could be corrected on that, we were going to kind of put it into the climate justice working group. However, the climate justice working group will have to kind of clearly identify what is it looking at. And then based on that, if that working group is not meeting the needs of what the committee thinks is needed, and there's still a gap, then that kind of leads us towards identification of additional working group that would then have to kind of develop a terms of reference that what is it going to focus in on that is still a gap in the other working groups. Trevor?
Just a clarifying point too on process. For those online, because we're live streaming, please don't put your questions or comments in the chat. And I think we'll just continue to, for online, just raise your hand, and then the chair will, for next meeting, we'll just do a better job on how to keep track of who is putting their hands up online. So just a friendly suggestion on that, because people on the YouTube channel won't be able to see the chat or anything like that. And then I think, and this is where the next conversation too, and I know we're running short on time, is we've developed some working group templates that I think the group can look at and see if there's any changes, or because really those different objectives like people in health and climate justice, the task for all of you now is to go off and develop the blurb and I think the terms of reference to then come back to this committee to vote on. And so as you get into, I think the detailed conversations are a little bit too premature right now about what the different objectives are. That's your homework, is to go off and think about what the different aspects and the objectives within the the terms of reference of the different working groups, and then next meeting, you can figure out all of the nuances of it.
One of the things I think we can probably do, just before we do a survey out with everybody signing up for working groups, is set up a Google Doc where we start kind of pulling together the scope of like just a blurb, not going into details, because that'll be the job of the working group themselves, but just a little blurb about what each of the working groups are going to, what's under the umbrella of that working group at the initial stage, and that'll inform people for what they sign up to the working group, and then the terms of reference will be a homework that each of the working groups needs to do to come back to the rest of the committee to kind of let us know what they kind of identified as their main to-dos and scope. Does that sound okay? Yeah.
So what do you need us to establish today before we leave? Because it sounds like
I would
we're
love to
kinda-
know if anybody, and the action I would really love to have is that if people can let me know the blurbs for those working groups before we do that. So if you have, if you're really wanting to lead a working group or participate in a working group, if you can let me know that blurb so that I can start pulling together that Google Doc and then send that out to the larger committee for their input.
But like before we leave this meeting today, because it sounds like we're rolling with the list we already have, and we all have a lot of homework to go do after that. Is there anything else we need to discuss today for that agenda item of establishing these working groups?
I don't think so. I think we're going to kind of, the homework will be if getting the blurbs, and then and then getting the survey out for people to sign up. And then who will be the co-chairs? But that's not something we need to decide at this meeting. That's something that we'll need to decide prior to the next meeting. Is that okay? Yeah? All right. So go ahead. Oh, technical will be, let's say, for example, Lucci was mentioning something about like the looking at it from the kind of the climate action plan, how it came to be, what's the carbon budget that was like identified, is this the science-based target, those types of kind of more technical quantification sort of issues related to the GHG target, as well as the adaptation kind of targets and indicators. Yeah, that would be the technical one. And that's the goal that we have, is to have a little blurb so that everybody knows what the scope of that working group is, so they can decide which one they want to participate in.
Well, and just to maybe add on that, if a group forms and decides that they want to change their name, or maybe they're outside of that list, that sounds like that's also totally flexible. These are sort of like starting suggestions, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Now, we do have one more item on the agenda, which is the budget. Did you want to just speak to that? Yep.
Sorry, before we do that too, in terms of like the key discussion items though, we have the two documents, which are the working group templates and then the working group minutes. And I just didn't hear a discussion or a kind of maybe a consensus is like, we good with these? Any big changes needed? Sorry, were those discussed, or maybe I missed that?
No, I don't think anyone had a chance to review them just as yet. But I think like that would be part of for people to review those templates, and if they do have information or input on it, we can, again, same sort of thing, provide that in a Google Docs where they can provide any input. But I think it really falls down to not for the larger committee to kind of sort that out, but the working groups themselves, since they're the ones who are going to be doing the work of it, to set up does this template work for you?
Well, just a quick question is, I assume this is copied from all the other advisory committees that have working groups? No.
It was based on best practices of different templates that are out there, but there's no standard template for working groups. And Beatrice actually did a deep dive on, for example, financial policies related to working groups, which we'll get into in the budget discussion.
Okay.
But these are just based on what I saw internally, externally, but there's no standard process. And this is where, like, in terms of process, and I don't want to be a stickler for process, but when working groups are formed, if you wanted to change your name or if you wanted to change your objectives, you as a working group cannot do that just by yourself. You need to come back to the advisory committee and you all need to vote on it to change that name or change that objective, right? Because I think we talked about as co-chairs, as Gabby and Ian talked about, is what we don't want is working groups going off for 6 months, doing work, coming back to the advisory committee, and the advisory committee being like, what?
Yeah, but at this stage in the game, we have not voted on any groups. So between now and the next meeting, we can change our minds, we can change our names, we can do whatever we need to. But then after that vote happens, then it's kind of fixed until we come back.
Yeah, because the scope, these are the working groups that came out of the first meeting, but they haven't been activated yet. So right now, there is no terms or reference or scope that the committee has voted on. So there is going to need to be some work that comes from the working groups to the larger committee that gets voted on as like, yes, this is the kind of scope of work. And then the work, once that is voted on, if there is changes, it would just need to be coming, that working group would just need to come back to the committee to provide the rationale for why, and we just need to vote on it again. Yep.
And maybe our counselors can help us just in terms of these documents are discussion items. So is there a certain action that the advisory committee needs to take on these discussion items? Does it need to be deferred, I guess, in terms of the next meeting?
Yeah, well, with the discussion item, you would vote to receive it, or if there's a recommendation to approve the recommendation. So if the committee is not ready to do that, you could just defer them to the next meeting.
Are we ready to do it on templates? That's a question. Sure.
Do people want to vote on the templates? All right, let's go. Let's do it. Let's do it. Okay, so does this first advisory group, working group, this is the climate change advisory working group. This is just the agenda item, right? Not the terms of reference. There was 2 templates, right? This is just for the minutes, right? Okay, so this is the scope of this would be the scope of work for each of the working groups. This would be the starting basis. Does everybody have okay with this? If you can vote for this template as a starting point? And okay, mover, seconder. Okay, any objections?
We just need a second.
Oh, we don't have to do okay, perfect. First, seconder, and any objections. All right, so that one passes. Then the next one is just the minutes from how working group meetings would report back. So there needs to be documentation associated with the working group meetings that take place. Really simple, just straightforward, but then there's just a paper trail that is available to the advisory group. Is this okay as a starting point for the template for the minutes for working groups? First, seconder, any objections? Okay, so those both pass. So we do just have the budget just on the left on the agenda. Okay, so I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think just from our initial conversations on this, what we really wanted to highlight is that there is a budget available for this advisory committee. So that means also in terms of that if there's, certainly it's for helping with the paying for the locations, the food that's provided, but there is working group for let's say if you need daycare for that kind of stuff, there's also that kind of options. There is a budget so it's not like the working groups are left on their own without any resources to help them on that. So there is some availability for the overall advisory group, this committee as a whole, and then just a little bit of I'm not sure exactly what's eligible in terms of expenses, but there is, a small budget for, let's say, if you need to kind of support people in working groups to give honorariums for people you bring in as experts, or if you need to pay for kind of daycare, just help people kind of make it to the working group meetings, transportation to meetings or something like that. Those types of resources are available. There is a mechanism that needs to be completed and filled out to kind of keep track of all of the expenses related to the committee as a whole. So there is paperwork that needs to be filed and documentation that needs to be provided as part of that. But just to highlight that there is some resources available to help people move the work forward. No, I don't think that. But I think it does pay for bus or transit, right? I don't know what the rules are on what the expenses are for. But keep in mind, this is for things that will mean not so much for our day-to-day logistical, but what we want to avoid is people not participating because they didn't have the ability to participate. That's really what we're trying to allocate the resources for.
I've got a quick question. In terms of the expenses per meeting, I understand that there's some sort of rental fee associated with using space. Can somebody elaborate on that?
Yep. Go ahead, Trevor.
Yeah, I'll just quickly walk you through this very simple financial tracking sheet that I developed today. So apologies for the last minute. But so our total budget, as approved by council, is $9,000. Our current projected expenses based on meeting rental, which actually I wanted to up that. We just got a quote from facilities just to rent this room. They said approximately $250 per event or $1,000 for the year of 4 meetings. So you'll see that highlighted below. And so the total projected for the year of expenses, actually I should put, it's $1,030, but then we've currently spent, not including this meeting, $664.03, leaving us with a projected surplus of $7,970 for spending of working groups, et cetera.
And what was the $600 for last meeting? I mean, I think it's kind of surprising for folks who haven't been on a working group before. I recently learned about having to rent the facility space in Hamilton City Hall, which is kind of strange. And then, sorry, what's the other expense item? Is that just for catering stuff?
The 414 was for the catering for the previous meeting.
And for example, today we don't have that. Who makes the decisions on this kind of stuff? We do? Okay.
Sorry, did I make the decision and give people no food? So yeah, just keep in mind, really the budget, we want to use it as reasonably and as possible, and it is really geared towards figuring out what are the needs of the working groups, and that will be part of the job. So just keep that in mind as as the working groups move forward. So you want to say something? Go ahead.
Sorry, the room rental thing is really kind of not sitting well with me. Just, I guess I am new to this space. So, but I'm just curious though, I mean, we're a working group working on helping Hamilton, and we have to pay rental fee, and that takes away the money that could go to reducing barriers for participation for other people who we want to engage. I don't know.
So what I understood is that it's for after-hours facilities, and that's the reason why. So I didn't know that either. I was like, oh my gosh, okay, but that's what I heard. So the setting up, the being here, and until we leave and things like that. So additional stuff.
It's just the world we live in. It's not one we have to be happy with.
I would just say regarding nourishment, maybe we just set a standard. I'm not saying that we cater all of our dinners, but just so people know how to arrive prepared,
Yeah.
especially if we meet during the hours when people are eating. So I'm
makes
happy
sense.
either way, but just we'll standardize that as we go forward.
Speaking of that on that one, so I did want to highlight, Beatrice sent the URL for the hub where we can use sharing. It's to document kind of all that thing, but it's also a hub for sharing. So if there's certain things that you want to share related to it, then let me know. That's something that we can kind of figure out what the hub needs to be so that like we can kind of accommodate kind of resource sharing across the network. Yep.
Just, I think I understand this, but just to flag for people who are going to be using the hub, this is all going to be accessible by Freedom of Information, correct?
It's publicly available.
Okay, so people, there's going to be Google Docs that are, I'm just wondering
Yeah.
how this is going to work in
So-
terms of working groups and then,
So the working groups would only put anything on, that doesn't mean that the hub needs to work for working groups, right? There could be other mechanisms that are a private Google document that a working group can use. This would be for the committee as a whole, but keep in mind, it's public. The goal on this is we want to make sure that there's a mechanism for sharing, but that it's transparent as well. So it is a public kind of entity that you can share with others so that they can see the work that the committee is doing and the sharings that's taking place at the committee. If you need to, doesn't mean that everything needs to be put up there. And for kind of private working group stuff, not everything needs to be put up there. It's only the stuff that you want to share with the larger committee and with the public that would get put up there.
okay, thanks.
Gosh, I have to verify on that. I'm not sure if that's going to be something you can do publicly, like as far as in that formal setting. As far as like, I think what you're saying is mostly for the internal, for this group here. I'm not sure if it's permitted to be a public kind of platform. So I have to.
Okay,
I've been
so
looking
let me
into
know.
it.
Yeah.
I'll let you know. Yeah. I just want to make sure.
I mean, is it worth distinguishing between publicly viewable versus public platform? Like, I don't think we're suggesting that other people are contributing
no one's
any
putting-
information,
yeah.
just that it's viewable. I think that was the idea.
Yeah, it would be viewable. Now, granted, it's not searchable by YouTube, it's not searchable by Google. Like I set it up as a kind of thing, but if you get the URL, if you take that URL and you share it with someone else, they will be able to see it.
People should just know that whatever they put on there is going to be
Well, they
accessible
can't
to
put
the-
things on there. That would have to kind of go through the co-chairs to get put up there. Yeah.
Okay. It's
Yeah.
just going to
Or
be
the
all stuff that's in the public domain
Yeah.
or that could be in the public domain, so people should just be aware of that.
Yeah, so it won't be serving the purposes of internal working sharings within working groups. That's a different thing. This is more about kind of sharing it once you're done, want to share it with the larger group.
We're just trying to bring it up, Gabby, and sorry, I meant to ask you this question before the meeting, but I just wanted to make sure everyone understands too, like, because so we discussed quickly internally with clerks about like what has to be publicly accessible and everything like that. From our understanding, this is just an informal hub.
Yeah.
That the committee can help to collaborate, maybe discuss some things that don't need voting on. But my question to you, Gabby, because like this is through like a sub-portal of the Clean Air Partnership,
It's just the guides hub that we use for resource sharing.
which, as you mentioned, is not accessible to the public, only if you're given a link to it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so just wanted to have that kind of open discussion if the group's okay with it. Like, do you prefer this hub? I know there were some issues with a potentially like a city SharePoint because people don't necessarily know how to use a SharePoint. But I mean, it's for the group's decision to use this as a hub or discuss other possible avenues. And I think perhaps even as you develop individual smaller working groups, you could set up your own smaller Google Share folders, for example, that it wouldn't be deemed FOI accessible or anything like that. It's only when you have formal documents brought forward to this larger committee that we need to put everything through the eScribe platform, which is FOI accessible and everything like that.
Yeah. This won't replace whatever's needed to do as part of the official processes and committees and the clerk's processes. This is not for that. That there's a separate already established kind of mechanism for that. This is just more for internal sharings across the advisory groups. The advisory group. Yep.
maybe I would just suggest that as we move forward in this process, we establish the groups, we review at some point the way to bring forward final work.
Yeah, for sure. That makes sense. Okay. Excellent. I think then we've got any agenda items that I might have missed or anything? I think we got them all.
Next meetings.
Oh, yes. The next meetings are scheduled for September 24th and November 26th. And I think it probably makes sense, let's make it as an agenda action item. For September 24th, we will set the meeting schedule for the 2025 year so that it's ahead of time and that it can get into people's calendars. Yep.
Would it be possible to have tent cards or something with our names that we pick up when we come in, just to help it's a big group kind of get a sense of people's names?
That would be great. I'd certainly love that.
And quickly, is anyone going to Dundas after the meeting?
Anyone going to Dundas after the meeting?
No, I guess I'm on the bus.
Sorry.
I just wanted to flag something quickly. Do we want to wait 3 months until the next meeting? Because that's when we're going to formalize the working groups. So nothing can formally happen in the working groups before the next meeting, which is 3 months from now. So I'm not saying that everyone's going to be super keen to commit a whole lot of time during the summer, but I'm not saying people aren't either. But at least if we met in, say, a month, that would give, or 2 months or something like that. I know there's staff time involved, but at the same time, we're pushing everything out like considerably. And what we're going to actually get accomplished this year is going to be diminished because of that.
Just to add to that, can we clarify the timeline? Like, so say, for example, a working group meets and we vote at the next meeting to formally recognize and accept that working group. Can they then bring forward something that they've worked on? Does it need to be sequential? Kind of similar to the delegation request, right? There is a mechanism where we can approve it and then immediately hear it. Could we do the same for working groups?
I see no reason why not. That just seems more efficient.
One more thing. Yeah, sorry, one more item, and I'm glad you raised the issue of additional meetings. We would also really like the opportunity, and I think we sort of described it as like an additional, emergency meeting's not the right word, but an opportunity for this committee to provide feedback on the recommended city-led projects that are being put forward to receive climate change reserve funding.
So that's for the upcoming grants, the upcoming selection of the projects that would receive funding, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
And that meeting, I mean, I would need to circle back because we're still sort of, we've got a number of layers we need to work through. But we could get back to the co-chairs maybe on the timing of that, but it would definitely be before the end of September.
Okay, so we would do that as a virtual meeting.
I think that could work for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Save money.
Yeah, I think that would be over the summer. It just makes a lot of sense to do it as a virtual meeting. Okay, and then we can kind of put it out to the larger group, and then those who are able or willing to join in that conversation can join that virtual meeting. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Just real quick, just to Jeff's point, is this is the bare minimum of meeting minutes. So although it does take a lot of effort for staff, it's up to you guys. You're the advisory committee. You tell us. For example, I was looking at the Accessibility and Disability Advisory Committee. They meet on a monthly basis. They also have a bunch of working groups. And I know, speaking with some of the staff liaison, it is a lot of work, but that's part of our job. So I just wanted to be frank with, like, this is the bare minimum. You guys can schedule more meetings as you see fit.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I would also love it if you could, like, if we just agree that you can tell us, like, this is our ask, like, it would really be helpful for us if you could help us with these things. And then, I mean, we're an advisory group and we can say no, but I mean, you can make that ask. The more you ask, I mean, there's so many of us who are eager to help. So, and then we have a community of people too. So that would be great if you just get it out there, let us know.
Okay. So I think that's our agenda, and I guess I need a motion to end the meeting, correct? First and second? Excellent. Any objections to ending? I think not. Oh, was that? Yep.
So we have these working groups. If we want to participate in them, we should send Trevor.
No, I'll send an email around, like, well, we're gonna send an email around to all committee members with the information on where they can sign up for the working groups. Yeah. Yep. No, not yet. But, oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, anyone who really wants to kind of lead a working group, I would really appreciate just a kind of little bit of an understanding, a little blurb on what the working group would be focusing in on as an initial hit, just initial kind of summary, so that we can inform the larger group of just a little bit of information, just in case they're wondering, what is this working group going to do, and do I really want to participate in it?
To Jeff's question, we'll not talk about that. Are we looking at meeting earlier than this date or not?
I think we already decided that we were going to be meeting earlier than this date in a virtual meeting to review the projects that have been put into the pipe, like into the mix for receiving reserve funding. We can add the other agenda items to that meeting if people want additional items on that meeting.
Could we add the approval of the working groups to that meeting?
I would have to get back to you, just because I think we might need more time to get it all settled up, you know, like just because my guess is that probably September 24th might be the best time to have that all nailed down and voted on, and kind of at the next meeting, just because I think it might be expecting too much to have that all kind of sorted out before then. However, any working group can do whatever they want in terms of it. I will be sharing back like who signed up and kind of reporting back to everyone on what the sign up for each of the working groups are. And then there is, you know, everybody will kind of like, there's a need for probably a contact list for each of the working groups so that they can communicate amongst themselves and get themselves sorted out, so that come September 24th, there is a scope of work, and one of the templates just for the scope of work is completed for the working groups that can then be voted on by the larger advisory group. Did that make sense? Did I go? Yeah? Okay. All right. So I guess the meeting's adjourned.
I just have a,
Yep.
Are we allowed to have a Zoom-only meeting?
I don't think there's any issue with it. An all virtual meeting. Are we allowed to have an all virtual meeting?
Well, I think at the very least, like, staff would have to be here to stream it through the streaming platform here that goes on to the city's YouTube channel. So I don't necessarily think anyone has to be here physically to make quorum, but we do have to stream it on the city's YouTube channel, right? So therefore, staff would have to be here.
Okay.
That was my question. That's where I
They
was
always get us, eh?
Aren't you just like paying for
Yeah, I was gonna say, we'll take that back and see what's possible in terms of if the committee wants to do a 100% virtual meeting. How do we do that with YouTube? We'll take that back.
Okay, and it might just be like it doesn't have to be an official advisory committee meeting, my understanding, right? Like, is there a part of the voting? Is that what you're looking for, Linda? The advisory committee to vote on in each of them? Like, is there a voting official process that you're looking for, or just input for the?
I think we're looking for input, because we'll be coming to you with a recommended list of projects, and part of what we would like to do is to get advice from you. What do you think of what's on the list?
Because that might not need a full official advisory committee meeting, right? That just might be for those folks who are interested in learning more about what's being put into the mix for the reserves. Yep.
The only thing I would say is, in terms of transparency about how like reserve funds are being spent, I would advise that it's a full meeting, because we're providing advice on how these funds would be spent. And I think from your perspective too, the city's perspective, you would want that advice to be on the record, so to speak.
Yep. Okay.
I think so too, because we'll then ultimately be presenting the recommended projects to council.
Okay. Sounds good. Excellent. Thank Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
And I apologize for being late.